do drink on occasion, not to an amount where I've ever been incapacitated from being intoxicated, but I have been under the influence before. I guess I'm a social drinker. I mean, I typically have limits like 3 beers, and it's just to, whenever I'm at a party, loosen up and talk to some people. I've never had the intention of getting blacked out drunk or throwing up, as weirdly a lot of people do, but I kind of just do it to loosen up a little and talk to people that I wouldn't typically talk to.
When I first came to Los Altos High School, drinking at dances and stuff like that was pretty prevalent. And so that's one of the reasons why we have the breathalyzer that we do now. It's really not to catch students, it's about stopping students. But the students that we had in terms of coming to dances under the influence was pretty, well, it was intense. And so one of the things that we try to do is to just send the message that coming here is a safe environment and we don't want to have students doing that. Luckily, knock on wood, during that time we never had students like hurt or killed. But in my lifetime, I had lost a very good friend when I was in high school to drunk driving, so it's not fun. And again, I think a lot of drinking for students is it's easy to get, they don't see a huge damage in it, and it's pretty short term, right? Unless, of course, something bad happens. And it's that piece of it that makes it so horrible, because you can't bring somebody back to life after they crash into a tree or something. And I think that's the hard part, is that when you're under the influence, you make poor decisions that can kill people.
Last year, I had worked up in San Francisco doing a crisis service. So this would be either children, adolescents, or adults who are kind of going through some type of crisis. So they would kind of come to our attention. So one young lady that I worked with, I guess she was reporting that, you know, she sometimes would like to go out and have a drink with her boyfriend and things like that, even though she was underage. I guess her boyfriend was old enough to buy her something, so then she would kind of, you know, partake of that. And there were probably other instances where there were, you know, like people would report that they have used alcohol even though they're under 21. So.
I work at Safeway. Yes, there's been multiple occasions where we've had minors under the age of 21 try to buy alcohol from the registers.
What are the rules?
Most of the time we just we ask them for their ID, because we're actually required by law to ask for ID anyone under the age of 30. That just prevents us from getting in trouble. Most of the time what happens is, if we do end up catching them, or it doesn't go through in our system, we don't sell it to them. There's been a couple of incidents that have happened while I've been in the store. Probably the most memorable was a group of, well, they were armed, and they broke into the liquor case and stole all the liquor and walked out of the store. And that was it was scary, I'm not gonna lie, because we didn't really know what to do. We kind of just left them alone, because that's something we didn't want to take into our own hands. So we just notified the authorities immediately after, and I think they ended up getting caught at some point, maybe like a month or 2 down the road. They tried to do it at a different store. But that would probably be the scariest thing that's happened since I've been there.
Well, I think one thing that definitely doesn't validate teen drinking is either depression or any psychological issue that they feel that they can distract themselves from by getting intoxicated or partying, because that just leads to alcoholism and then a bunch of health issues mentally and physically, and that could honestly lead to hurting yourself or others. And really there is nothing that validates it necessarily. You just have to understand what you're doing. You have to make that choice knowing that you won't get sucked into any addiction or go too far to the point where you'll injure yourself or others. That's how car accidents happen. That's how a lot of things happen. That's how random fights happen. That's how getting arrested happens. I mean, I know plenty of people that's happened to just because they didn't want to get grounded, and it was not worth it?
Well, that's also a really interesting question because culturally, in many cultures, it's just part of like everyday life, right? I think when you have issues is when you make it be an exception, right? So in the United States, there's a law that says you can't drink until you're a certain age. Why that certain age is special, I don't know. And you guys wouldn't know this, but 20 years ago, states had different drinking ages, right? So you could go to one state and you were eligible to drink, and you could go to another state. Now it's become uniform that it's 21, but 10 years ago, 15, well, longer than that, maybe 25 years ago, you could go to different states and you could drink at different ages. So I think a lot of it is the message behind it. Like, if it's part of your everyday life, you probably don't think a lot about it. And so underage drinking is not going to be that big a deal. And so I don't know that you would have students doing it and abusing it any more than you would have them abusing any other substance, right? But because we make a big deal out of it, for some reason, I think there's more weight into it. And so it's one of those things that students do as rites of passage. I think it's one of those things that students do to rebel. And I think it's one of those things that students don't often think about the long-term impact. Consequences in terms of teenage drinking is if you get caught, right? That's the first part, is if you get caught, there's obviously legal ramifications. At a school, there's also school ramifications. So you get suspended or you lose privileges or those kinds of things. Do I think that those are deterrents? Not always. I think that some students don't care. I think for some kids it is a deterrent. I don't know. But in terms of like long-term, I don't know that there's an answer. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I don't think there's one way to stop this. I think it's about education, and I think it's about teaching students limits.
First of all, I'm not an attorney, but from my knowledge, obviously the law in the US is that you must be age 21 to purchase and to also consume alcohol. So when you come into possession or you actually drink alcohol when you're underage, it can result in whoever bought it for you getting into trouble with the law, as well as consequences for you in terms of perhaps getting in trouble with parents, families, school, and if you've been kind of doing some other kind of behavior as a consequence of your drinking, then that can also lead to other types of charges.
I think they need to bring it up because teenagers, especially now, they are definitely too scared and insecure. The mass, of course, there are other people who aren't afraid to bring it up, and to them, they're going to have a lot easier time with this. But the adults and just peers around us need to bring it up and need to talk about it with either their kids or their younger brothers or sisters or whatever, just to make sure that they're aware of that if it happens, this is what you do. Have a plan.
Education is a big part of it, and I think having conversations around the dinner table, I know not a lot of people eat around the dinner table, but I think having those conversations where it's not taboo. I had two high school students, I had two kids that went to this high school, and our rule of thumb was this, right? You make poor decisions, you call me, and I will come and pick you up, and I will not talk to you about your poor decision for 24 hours, right? That gives us both time to cool off. And I think what that did for my kids, and for parents that I tell this, is that you're not reacting to the situation, and it gives you time to have a conversation about what the issues are. So you're not saying, you did this, that. What you're really talking about is why did you do that?
I think what's really necessary is that for people to kind of just be able to talk about it kind of more openly, but also if parents can bring it up and it's a topic that's sort of open for discussion in the family, then I think that's great too.
Since drunk or not, you don't know if that person was at your party or wherever you were drinking. You don't know what's going down. Do not walk home when you're incredibly intoxicated. That's stupid. You'll do something you'll regret. And if you stay where you're at, you could regret it too. So just don't be afraid to call your parents.
So I think one thing is being able to talk to your parents, or safe rides. We'll just talk about safe rides for a second. I think safe rides sends a really weird message. I think as adults we say, oh yeah, safe rides is great, right? So go drink and then call somebody to come pick you up. I like the idea that kids feel safe about getting a ride home in a stressful situation, but I don't like the fact that we say go ahead and go drink and we'll come pick you up. It's a weird oxymoron kind of thing to say. But on the other hand, I do think it's good that we have these kind of fail-safes to catch kids or catch anybody who's in that kind of situation. But I do think communication is really critical, and I also think being able to then have a conversation after the fact. So for me, that was that 24-hour period, right? I'm not going to talk to you about your mistake or your choice for 24 hours so that we can both be rational about this. Because I think if you just get mad, I think then what ends up happening is you make the same choice over and over and over again, right? You're not learning anything from it, you're just reacting to it.
I think one of the things that you can choose to do is to really, obviously assess the situation. And if I really don't want to have something to do with that, would be to try to remove myself from that situation. It could mean that, like, you say, like, oh, I really have to get going and just kind of leave. Obviously, sometimes maybe you've arrived there with somebody and that was sort of your transportation back, right? And then maybe if they've been drinking or something, you do not want to get in the car with them if they've been drinking. So it might mean that you might have to contact somebody else, like even maybe your parents or somebody else who can come and pick you up or something like that. But I think leaving being able to leave that situation is probably your best bet. I think if things are really kind of becoming unsafe, or if somebody has, for example, like passed out or something like that, then you also need to kind of not worry about whether you're going to get in trouble with that friend or that person that's passed out, like if they'll get mad at you for calling somebody, because that person may need medical attention, so you might just need to call 911.
Do I think it would be a good idea? Yes. How do you get it into the curriculum? I'm not sure. I do think that our health program here is a very solid program. I think a lot of students opt not to take it. And I think that's a shame, because I think a lot of what we want students to know is actually taught in the class. I think when you take it online, you miss a big portion of it. And I don't know how we build it into other parts of the curriculum, but I think it would be important to do. I just haven't figured out a way to do it that it doesn't feel like it's like this one-time shot, like everybody goes to the gym and we have this big, assembly. I don't find things like that are very helpful. I think that if you weave it into the curriculum where it becomes part of what you do, I think that's much more impactful in terms of students making good decisions. Or, I don't know why I'm talking to students, because maybe you're students, but I think everybody. I think it has to be part of what you think about when you make those decisions in order to have it have an impact. So a one-time thing, I'm not so sure is real helpful.
Safe.
I definitely would like that. I would definitely like to see that more like implemented into the school system. They need to tell you how to deal with it. They can't just say, you'll go to jail, you'll get fined, because then if somebody is drunk and they're out in public and they're scared, they're gonna freak out, and again, they'll hurt themselves or somebody else. And so, yeah, we really do need to educate the youth about it.
I think different schools probably have different levels of how much education they provide specific to alcohol. I think probably there is a place to do some of it in the school. I think also if people could have discussions within their family and other kinds of like contexts, maybe like in youth groups and things like that. Because I think the more spaces there are to discuss those kind of things, because you might not feel as comfortable at school talking about some of these things as you might be with like a peer group, like in a different setting, but not maybe with your parents or something like that.
And this is just showing that not all teen drinking is bad if you have a plan. If, for instance, about a month ago, I went out and I had some stuff to drink. I was staying at a friend's house the entire night, and I wasn't very comfortable with how far the party was going. There was a good amount of drinking, and so I could tell I was starting to lose myself a little. I called my parents. I said, hey, this isn't my scene necessarily, and so they picked me up. I went home. I didn't get in trouble, and all in all, it wasn't a terrible night. Nothing bad happened. I wasn't punished, and the law didn't need to get involved. So that just shows that if you are in trouble, you can talk to an adult. If not your parents, someone who has a license and is sober, make sure to have them in your phone, or know someone else who can get a hold of them.
I just think that in light of all that we now know currently about alcoholism and drinking, we need to have better education about this. And I think students need to understand, kids in general, families need to talk about alcoholism in their families, because it's genetic. there are people who are predisposed to be much more impacted by alcohol than others. And I think those secrets that, you know, were never shared as families, I think really need to be shared, because I think that might help educate and have students make better decisions.